Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Trollhunters Tales of Arcadia. Okay, so this episode, Recipe for Disaster, is, well, it's the episode where Jim finally confronts Strickler about his changeling activities after learning the previous episode that he was in fact a changeling, and obviously that conversation goes about as well as you'd expect it to. But whereas they kind of just start fighting over dinner because Strickler's kind of Jim's mom's boyfriend, which makes things a little bit awkward. But also this is the episode where Claire meets a troll for the first time and doesn't really handle it very well. So this is the kind of the episode. So this is something that had been building in the background, but Claire had kind of suspected something was weird with Jim for the longest time, because ever since she met him and started figuring out that he was something was obviously strange with him. Obviously, he wrote her that letter, and obviously he's been suspecting that he's been hiding some things from her. So it's kind of been building in the background as Claire kind of is like, okay, I need to figure out what exactly it is that's going on with Jim, because he's obviously not going to tell me. I'm going to have to take matters into my own hands. So and ultimately, well, it reaches its head in this episode, and it winds up kind of reaching its climax in the next one. So, that's just been something that's been building throughout the first half of part one of Trollhunters. So, it has been something that the story has been leaning towards. And, also this episode kind of has been leaning towards the whole thing with Strickler, because obviously Strickler's been hiding his true nature from Jim the entire time, and now Jim knows. But in case it opens with Strickler holding he's having a lecture about Napoleon, I believe, and how he fought in war, and he explains that war is chaos, and those who are winning the war are in control of the chaos, both for and against their enemies, and of course, he then proceeds to go on to continue his lecture. And while he's continuing his lecture, Jim quickly realizes that Strickler he can't really believe that Strickler has been a changeling this whole time, and notes that the class has been practically eating out the palm of his hand, which frustrates him. And of course, Toby does kind of wonder if Jim is in fact right about him being a changeling, and if he knows that Jim is the troll hunter, and more importantly. And of course, Jim points out that Strickler calls him Young Atlas, which is what Pilar very deliberately taunted him with. So he surmises that it's most likely that Strickler does in fact know he's the troll hunter. So and he also considers ending him right here, right then and there. But he also points out that obviously Strickler is first and foremost dating his mom, but also he could have important information, and of course Toby surmises that states that they should probably come up with something else. His idea is generally that they should probably try and see if they can get Strickler to divulge where the bridge is, and so that they can shut down the whole thing and from releasing Dunmar and releasing an unspeakable evil upon the world. Pointing out that that's probably more important than killing Strickler for relying to him, and of course Jim agrees that Toby is probably right, and they just decide to come up with a plan. At which point the class ends, but Strickler ends it on a note stating that ultimately one of the most formidable armies in the world was taken down by the mosquito of all things, and pointing out that malaria was the thing that ultimately ended them. And it's at this point where he dismisses everybody, and they go off on their merry way. And of course, it's at this point where he actually stops Jim, and of course he dismisses Toby, telling him that he would like to talk to Jim alone. And of course, Toby then proceeds to leave, but tells Jim to get him to see if he can divulge where the bridge is, and before leaving. And of course, it's at this point, and of course, while as everybody is filing out of class, Claire and Darcy Scott, who we have met previously, but who hasn't really gotten a major role up until now because she's mostly just been in the background. But she appears like once in one episode and has one speaking role before this. But so not an important character up until now. But so I'm revealing her now. But of course, Darcy notices that Claire seems to be eyeing Jim and teases her over it, and she points out that she's more so curious about Jim more than anything, and does remind her about the letter Jim wrote, and of course Darcy understands where she's coming from, pointing out that obviously it was a letter about fighting monsters, then anybody would be worried about that, but as it does wonder if she's thinking that Jim is probably hiding something, and of course, Claire points out that she doesn't know, but she intends to find out. So, at which point she and Darcy leave the classroom. Meanwhile, Strickler then proceeds to sit down with Jim and points out that he kind of implies that the whole situation about how both of their secrets are now out and they now know that one of them is the troll hunter, and the other is a changeling. But the way he words it implies that he's talking about the fact that obviously Strickler is also dating Jim's mother, and also points out that Barbara had invited him over for dinner, and points out that he hopes that won't be awkward between the two of them. And of course Jim points out that it's probably fine, and he's actually looking forward to it. So of course Strickler points out that he tells Jim that that's great and that he'll see him at 7. At which point they both leave the classroom. And of course it's at this point where Toby and Jim then proceed to kind of workshop some plans now that they have an idea of what Strickler's plans are for the evening. And of course we find out Claire is actually listening in on all of this, and the camera kind of follows her and keeps her in frame for pretty much the entirety of the conversation. But of course, at this point where Toby asks him if there was a good idea for Strickler to come over to dinner, and of course Jim points out that he didn't think it was a good idea at first, but then he realized something important that would actually absolutely help them. Obviously, Strickler stays in his office pretty much the whole time, and that we've seen him. And with Jim, of course, surmising that it's possible that Strickler may be hiding some sort of information or some sort of secrets that are just hidden in his office that they'll absolutely need to find. And of course admits for that reason that they should that they now have a plan. While Jim has Strickler over at the house for dinner, Toby can lead a party to go look for any of the secrets that might be hiding in Strickler's office, and points out that it'll probably be fine, and points out that he'll probably be like, no more secrets, no more anything, it'll all come out tonight. At which point Claire realizes that they're coming her way, and she needs to hide. So she hides in a trash can, which she later admits was gross, but was the last resort. At which point they just kind of leave the place. And of course, Jim proceeds to go off to go get ready for dinner. They just kind of continue their school work and classes, and then they just kind of ends, and they go on to go on their merry way and just start with the plan. Of course, Jim of course has backup. He immediately goes to Droll and proceeds to tell him the plan about how Strickler is coming over for dinner, and tells him about how Strickler is secretly a changeling, and of course Droll is uncomfortable with the plan, pointing out that he wishes that he could just go up and rip him limb from limb, instead of just letting him sit down and enjoy the pleasantries of a good dinner. But Jim is currently whipping up something in a bowl while he's talking to Droll, telling him that they can't really do any of that because first and foremost, Jim's mom's gonna be home, and obviously it would look great if Droll just kind of came up out of nowhere, scared his mother half to death, and then proceed to tear Strickler limb from limb. So they decide to formulate a plan. As essentially, what Jim's going to do is that he'll knock once if everything's okay, and stomp once if everything's okay, stomp twice if everything's not okay, and if Jim stomps twice, then Droll will just come up out of the basement and then start providing backup. And of course, Troll points out that he likes the plan, but again, Jim has to reiterate that there's gotta be no ripping and tearing of any sort of limbs from anyone's body. So and tells Troll not to get too excited. So at which point, Troll just kind of waits in the basement for his cue for pretty much the remainder of the episode, and we'll find out in a minute why. But meanwhile. We find out that Toby has since locked himself in the school and is currently waiting for Jim's cue. And sure enough, eventually Strickler does in fact show up at Jim's house. And of course Strickler then proceeds to greet Jim and Barbara, and then proceeds to sit down and start talking and enjoying himself and having dinner with Jim and Barbara. So they just sit down and chat for a little bit, and of course this enables Jim to kind of give Toby the signal about how it's ready about how he's able to get into the school and start poking around Strickler's office. And of course, Toby reveals that he's actually planned ahead of that, revealing that he's actually just currently in the rendezvous point and is awaiting extraction. And of course, what we find out, and of course, he eventually gets frustrated because somebody isn't getting the signal. And it's eventually revealed that they had Not Enrique come in, and he kind of bribes Not Enrique to kind of help out, revealing that he's going to give Not Enrique his socks in exchange for him letting him out of the locker that he hid in, so that he can just let Blinky and Arya in after hours. And of course it does work. Although Not Enrique gives him a hard time, and Toby does point out that he'll get the other one when the job's done. So eventually, but eventually Not Enrique cooperates and lets Toby out of the locker. And it's at this point where Not Enrique points out that he doesn't really want to be there, and obviously he's got coerced into being there. And the main reason Toby pointed this out is because obviously Blinky told him that they would need a changeling to handle what exactly it is that's coming. So for that reason, he points out that they need to just kind of keep a tab on him, and they'll need a changeling to help out. So and of course Not Enrique is annoyed, but points out that as long as they do it quickly, he doesn't really mind, because there's a, as he puts it, there's a 9 p.m. feeding that he, quotes, doesn't want to miss, which is, inappropriate, somewhat inappropriate, considering what the actual story, considering there are some adult jokes in this series. I will admit that, but I have commented on them a couple of times, but there are some adult jokes in this series. But in any case, Toby then proceeds to go find the nearest entrance while Not Enrique just kind of wanders around a little bit, and eventually Toby does find the entrance and lets Arg and Blinky in, and Blinky is visibly impressed by the schools, pointing out that and in his own words, the fabled halls of Alexandria could not pale of the Library of Alexandria could not pale in comparison to the halls of Arcadia Oaks High School. And of course, Toby doesn't fully understand what Blinky's talking about, especially since he doesn't know what the Library of Alexandria is. And Blinky just tells him that he's most likely just playing ignorant, and likes that about how Toby has a sense of humor. Meanwhile, Arg winds up getting caught on a banner, and they tell him that they need to keep a low profile and stay stealthy. So and of course helps Arg fix the banner. But then they find out that somebody's coming, and of course Toby points out that he thought the coast was clear, and Not Enrique points out that wasn't really his job. So they then proceed to pretend to be part of the mural in the hallway, while Senior Uhl just kind of comes along, notices the banner lying on the ground in the hallway, but since they're pretending to be part of the mural, he doesn't see them, and just kind of cleans up the banner to rehang later. So because he doesn't really want to bother with it right now, and then he proceeds to walk off and leave. And with that, they then proceed to make their way to Strickler's office. And meanwhile, Strickler is currently sitting down, having a good time having a conversation with Barbara and telling stories. And when we find out one particular story that he decides to tell is a more dinner conversation friendly version of the story of the time. Bilar ate a security guard at the Arcadia Oaks Museum of Natural History, and he kind of lampshades the fact that the guy was Italian, pointing out that he told his coworker that he brought him a midnight snack, but that the guy gave him indigestion and tells him that that's the problem with eating Italian, and of course Barbara gets it. Well, Barbara just kind of laughs while Jim kind of understands what the story is actually about, and of course this is this point where Barbara then proceeds to get a call from work, and she proceeds to leave, and she goes into the other room to take it. And meanwhile, Claire is currently sneaking around Jim's property, and apparently didn't hear the part of the conversation where Strickler was where Jim mentioned that Strickler was coming over for dinner. Or more specifically, he didn't actually say it when he was talking about inviting him over to dinner. But either way, apparently Claire is oblivious to the fact that Strickler came over for dinner and is curious as to why he's there, and but quickly realizes that she needs to find a way into Jim's house to figure out what's going on, and eventually decides to sneak in through the basement, which causes Draw to hide because he's quickly realizing that somebody is in the basement that shouldn't be. And of course he's prepared to kind of, tear whoever's limbs off limb from limb. But then Claire kind of gives herself a pep talk, telling herself that fortune favors the bold. And when he realizes that the girl who's just broken into the house is Claire, Joel just kind of backs off and decides to hide and just wait it out and wait for her to leave. And of course, once Barbara, goes into the other room to, hide from that, to go and take her phone call, it's at this point where Jim kind of decides to finally confront Strickler and asks him to kind of clarify some things about the story about who he was asked to work with, and of course Strickler points out that it was the supervisor's son, which is technically Bilar without saying it's Bilar, and of course Jim points out that Bilar is obviously the guy sounds quite that, and Strickler describes him as being quite bullish, and with Jim adding that he sounds like a real monster, which of course causes the two of them to become very tense very quickly, and they quickly realize that, and they quickly kind of have a bit of a back and forth where the two of them both realize now that they both know each other's secrets, and of course they quickly realize that now they know now that they know, it's going to only get a little bit more awkward from here. And of course it is a very awkward, meeting with your enemy over dinner. So it is. I can understand why both of them would be intense about it. But it's at this point where Barbara walks in and tells them that it's going to be a couple more minutes while she takes the call. So it's at this point where she tells them that it's going to be a few minutes, and if they need anything while she's in the other room, and they both tell them to bring them a knife, the sharper the better, which it does wind up becoming really funny in a minute, because while it is an intense fight, they do wind up fighting with the cutlery, but in case Barbara does eventually bring back the knife, and it brings them both a knife to cut the steak with, and they then proceed to kind of start fighting, whereas they start realizing that they now know each other and start letting out their secrets, and of course Jim then proceeds to confront Strickler, demanding to know where the bridge is, and demands to know what he knows. But of course, Strickler points out that obviously he points out that the main reason he knows that the whole situation was going to be awkward, because he points out that Bilar deliberately told Jim to force this exact scenario, to kind of just force them to be in a position where they would have to try and kill each other, and with Strickler pointing out that he was either supposed to bring back the amulet or kill Jim, and when Jim points out that Strickler probably isn't going to kill him, since obviously he's Barbara's son, and they of course both point out that they both admit that while they would like to kill each other, they also note that killing each other would probably make things a little bit strange between them and Barbara. So of course it's at this point where they start fighting each other with the knives, and And of course, at this point, where Strickler then proceeds to tell Jim that he knows what Jim's capable of. He knows what Jim isn't capable of. He knows that, and he also knows that he has a thing for Claire and likes Toby, and has a friendly, and then sees Blinky as a bit of a surrogate father, but also points out that obviously he's trying to defend he also knows that he knows that Jim's friends are going to raid his office as they speak, and points out that he's not going to keep some sort of things like that unguarded, and of course it's at this point where Jim asks him if he knows that he has a draw in his basement, and proceeds to stomp twice, but Strickler quickly realizes what's going on with Drawl, and quickly realizes that he can kind of disorient Drawl by tapping his foot also. And Claire's just confused as to what a drawl is. While Drawl just kind of confusedly counts all the times they stomp on his fingers, and is very obviously frustrated because he's not good at math. But because they're stomping on the ground, it causes a bunch of dust to kind of just break down from the ceiling in the basement, and this causes Claire to sneeze while Drawl whispers a gesundheit to her, and of course she thanks him, but then realizes there's somebody else in the basement, and when she turns around, she immediately sees Drawl in the basement, freaks out, and then hits her head, and of course, it's at this point where Jim's mom is currently finishing up the dessert for them, since they finished their meal by this point, and that was to stretch Jim long enough for Strickler to make the first strike, and they then start fighting each other with the cutlery that's on the table, which is funny, but also a life or death thing, since they're kind of just using makeshift weapons at this point, and of course, Jim quickly gets his neck knocked away, but quickly picks up, a fork, which again is funny, but they do start fighting it. They do start fighting each other, and of course, eventually Strickler decides he's had enough and switches to his troll form, which is the first time we've actually seen it, and of course, it's at this point where Strickler asks Jim if it would be a good look for picture day, which of course is an ironic thing. But it's at this point where the two of them then proceed to start fighting again. And of course, it's at this point where Strickler tells Jim that he may have a drawl in his basement, and also points out that drawl doesn't seem like he's a very good guard dog, but he also points out that he actually has something in his office to defend it, and proceeds to tell Jim that he actually has a creature called an Astra Monstrum in his office, and when Jim asks him what that is, he points out that it's a vaporous creature, dormant unless disturbed, and that it's very good at erasing pesky snakes. And of course, at this point where we actually get a cutaway of them fiddling around Strickler's office, and of course they're currently trying to figure out where to actually find any secrets that Strickler may be hiding in his office, and of course Toby immediately tries to get into the mindset of Strickler to try and figure out where he would keep some sort of secret, and then of course to try and get himself into the mindset, he starts fiddling with Strickler's pen, and it's revealed, and this is a very good example of Chekhov's gun, by the way, but Strickler is shown fiddling with his pen in nearly every episode he's in. And it finally pays off here because it's revealed that Strickler was hiding a key in his pen the whole time. And of course when Toby opens the pen, he quickly reveals that that there's a key in it. And after fiddling around for a bit, they eventually find a lock on the in the bookshelf. And Toby immediately inserts it, but then quickly realizes that it's not working, at which point Blinky reiterates that they would need a changeling to find changeling secrets, and reveals that the only way to actually open the lock is to have Not Enrique do it. And Not Enrique is visibly annoyed at the fact that he has to help now. They do give him the key, and he opens the lock for them anyway. At which point they start exploring around the secret chamber in the back of Strickler's office, which just kind of opens up behind this bookshelf, and they do start exploring, and it's obviously just built into the thing. And I am curious how long it's implied that Strickler's probably been in Arcadia Oaks for a long time. So it's possible that he was around since before the school was built, and was most likely built it into his office when he took over the job as the Arcadia Oaks history teacher. But but in any case, his office is just here, and his office just has a secret chamber in it, and they start looking around, poking around in it. And the first thing Blinky notices is that Strickler has a blueprint of the amulet in his office, and also seems to have various bits and pieces of amulet parts, which of course Blinky notes is very strange and weird, and he doesn't fully understand why it's there. But while Toby, meanwhile, finds a book, which Blinky identifies as the Book of Gahuel, which, as he points out, is a book about changeling history and Gum history. And when they start opening it and fiddling through it, and leafing through it, they do start looking through it, and quickly discover a picture that looks a lot like Arg, which of course Toby comments on, and pointing out that it does look like Arg, but at this point where Not-Enrique clarifies that it is Arg. And Toby thinks that Not-Enrique is making a joke at first, and when he sees Arg's reaction to that revelation, he realizes that it's not a lie, and that Arg did used to eat people. And of course, this is this point where Blinky does reveal that yes, Arg was a Gum at one point, and was in fact a general in his army. But also points out that at the last minute he eventually had a change of heart, and decided to join the side of good and help, and took an oath of peace, and that without him, the world they know would have most likely looked very different than it does today. And of course, Arg just reminisces about sorrowfully reminisces about all the pain and suffering he caused. Remarking that they kept screaming, "No, stop! Don't eat me!" But of course, this is one where Toby then proceeds to console with him, to console him, telling him that that's not who he is anymore. And points out that whether or not he was a Gum in the past, he's a good person now. So he obviously points out that it's fine, and that's regardless of what's currently going on, that they're probably not going to be in very much trouble. And they do point out that now that he's on the side of good, he's very happy to know that Arg did have a change of heart. And this winds up causing their relationship to become a lot stronger, because Toby finds out about Arg's troubled and iffy past, and decides to kind of just be like, you know what, it doesn't matter who you are, you're a good person now, so that's all that matters. And they decide to fist bump. And so this is where Toby then proceeds to find a fetch in Strickler's hidden office. And of course, when Blinky asks Toby what he's discovered, he tells him that of course Toby points out that he thinks it might be a donut cushion, and remarks that maybe Strickler has hemorrhoids, but it's revealed to actually be a fetch. And yes, and they point out that it's most likely how Not-Enrique got out of the Darklands. So they point out that he should take very good care of it and make sure that nothing happens to it. And of course, at this point where they start leafing through to see if they can find any form of information, when we actually meet the Astra Monstrum, which then proceeds to wake up. And when we only really see it's a crystal of some sort, and Not-Enrique quickly realizes what's going on and decides to convince Toby that he should stick his head through the fetch, and hide see if he can find something on the other side, pointing out that maybe he'll see the Nunez kid. And of course, this point, and because since Blinky and Arg are currently distracted, and Toby's their only real eyes at this point, Toby decides to do it because he thinks Not-Enrique is trying to be helpful. And of course we do actually see the Darklands for the first time, because because Toby has his head stuck through the fetch at this point. And And once he realizes that none of them are going to really see the Astro Monstrum coming, Nanarike decides to make himself scarce and leaves the office. And of course, at this point where Arg then proceeds to smell smoke, and he quickly, and of course, meanwhile, Toby sees some sort of ghostly figure in the Darklands that proceeds to chase him, and it's at this point where Arg and Blinky quickly realize that they've got an Astro Monstrum that's trying to chase them, and they then proceed to pick up Toby and run through the halls with him to kind of get away from the Astro Monstrum. With Arg ripping the door off Strickler's office and using it to block the Astro Monstrum from escaping so they can get out. But of course, the Astro Monstrum, being a vapor creature, eventually just goes around the door and just kind of goes chases them into the hallway anyway. And of course, this winds up devolving into a chase scene where they quickly realize they need to get away from the Astro Monstrum, and they quickly run into Nanarike again after eventually Toby gets his head out of the fetch when he realizes that his body is moving without him. And of course, when he thinks he's okay at first, but then realizes he sees the Astro Monstrum and realizes he's probably not. And then Arg and Blinky decide to, split up and see if they can draw the Astro Monstrum away from Toby, which doesn't work. And it proceeds to just chase after Toby. And by extension, Nanarike, since in the process, Toby Toby winds up running past Nanarike, and the Astro Monstrum starts chasing him as well. So they then proceed to run into the gym, where Nanarike quickly realizes the best way to escape the Astro Monstrum is to climb up into the ventilation system above where the rope climb is in the gym, and then decides to just kind of leave and do exactly that, leaving Toby to kind of fend for himself. And Toby quickly realizes he needs to actually get into the vent, and is frustrated that Nanarike just kind of left him behind. But then, to his surprise, successfully manages to climb up the rope as well. And of course, is surprised that he managed to do it, and proceeds to follow Nanarike into the vents, where they then proceed to fall out and into the hall, into another hallway, where the Astro Monstrum then proceeds to corner the both of them. At which point, Blinky and Arg show up with the fetch, and the four of them are able to get the Astro Monstrum sucked into the fetch, and just kind of take care of it that way. And of course, Blinky then makes a pun about how the Astro Monstrum just got schooled, and Toby just kind of rolls his eyes at him. But and of course, Nanarike proceeds to encourage Toby, telling him that he knew he could do it. But Toby doesn't really take kindly to the fact that Nanarike has started calling him Tubby in this episode, and then drop kicks him. And tells him to take a hike. And of course, this is this point where Nanarike then proceeds to just leave and goes back home. But of course, they quickly realize that they need to actually reveal the information that they told to Jim, and quickly. And they proceed to leave the school. Meanwhile, the battle between Strickler, the very comical battle between Strickler and Jim is still very much raging, and of course Strickler then proceeds to tell Jim that the war he's trying to fight is centuries old, and that they can't stop it coming, and that he can either be a part of it or fight against it. But he also points out that in the process, Jim is obviously going to have to fight back again. Jim is obviously going to try and keep his mother out of it for as long as possible, but he points out that ultimately him fighting and being the Troll Hunter, that's obviously not going to happen, and tells him that Jim was always his favorite student, and that he's doing it because he wants to protect him, which may or may not be true, but of course he admits that he once again tells Jim to give him the amulet, and Jim by this point has since donned his armor and is trying to fight back, and is trying to fight Strickler on even footing, and at which point pulls Strickler into a headlock with his sword, and tells him to fight, and tells him where the bridge is, and Strickler tells him he's not going to tell him. But it's at this point where Barbara has since, not successfully, I should mention, but she has in fact finished the pie that she was working on, and proceeds to pull it out of the oven, puts whipped cream on it to hide the fact that it's partly burnt, and then proceeds to pull it out of the oven. And of course, she comes out to discover that Jim and well, they play it off as a just trying to look for Strickler's contact lens, which of course conveniently means that Strickler is able to find means that Jim's amulet just kind of rolls under a piece of furniture, and Strickler manages to find it and swaps it out before putting it in making a big show of putting the contact back in his eye, while Jim finds his amulet and finds what he believes to be his amulet and retrieves it. And of course, when Barbara's confused about how Strickler wears contacts, but Strickler then proceeds to tell her that there's a lot she doesn't know about him. And of course, after finishing dessert, Barbara offers Strickler some leftovers, telling him that it's his for bringing him home. And tells him to bring some of it home. And well, Strickler just points out that the recipe could have sufficed, but of course Barbara insists that he brings it home, and eventually Jim also shoves the leftovers roughly into Strickler's arms at this point, and it makes it very clear that there's still going to be some animosity toward them at this point. And Strickler decides to leave, and Strickler does decide to thank the two of them for such a lovely evening, and then proceeds to tell Jim that he thinks things will be interesting now they've gotten to know each other. Well, Jim just kind of points out that it's going to be very disappointing when he finds out when he doesn't have Strickler for a teacher anymore. And with that, Strickler leaves, but not before knocking twice on the doorframe on the way out. And with that, he returns to his car and proceeds to go home. Meanwhile, Barbara just kind of comments on the whole thing about how Strickler seems nice, and does point out that he hopes that the two of them had gotten along, but of course Jim then proceeds to point out that obviously Strickler seemed a little two-faced to him, quite literally, because Strickler is a changeling. It's a pun, but And of course, Barbara's confused, since obviously he thought that they had gotten along so well. And it's at this point where Joel emerges from the basement with an unconscious Claire in his arms, and proceeds to show Jim what happened. And of course, Jim realizes there was something that happened in the basement that he's now going to have to deal with. So he then proceeds to gesture to make gestures toward Joel, and tells him to go back to the basement, and he'll deal with it later. But then proceeds to tell Barbara that Strickler isn't the kind of guy she thinks she is, and when she objects, he points out that he doesn't want her to see Strickler anymore. Which she rolls her eyes, pointing out that she expected more from Jim, and then leaves. Apparently not noticing that the basement door is open as she leaves, and then proceeds to go back into the kitchen. Meanwhile, Strickler has since returned to his office, and he talks with Don Enrique, who he points out should be home, but of course Don Enrique points out that his parents now think he sleeps through the night, and it's not a real big deal if he's out at night anymore. And of course he wonders if Strickler was able to do what he set out to do, and if he successfully killed the troll hunter, but of course Strickler points out that he got something better, and then proceeds to pull out the amulet, revealing that he had actually planted a fake on Jim, and that now it was fitting in what he said at the beginning of the episode. He is now in control of the chaos. At which point the episode ends with so yeah. First and foremost, this is the episode where Claire meets a troll for the first time, and she doesn't take it well. But also, the entire conversation about how they start fighting over everything and over dinner is just an interesting conversation in itself. Since obviously it becomes a very tense conversation very quickly, because obviously it's two enemies meeting over dinner, and that goes about as well as you'd expect. And they also kind of banter back and forth about their beliefs. While we find out that Strickler is only trying to keep Jim and his family out of it, and tries to keep him safe, because he knows what the legacy of the troll hunter is, and that Jim is most likely going to be in danger because of it. But he may or may not be lying, since he's also trying to get Gumar out of the Darklands. He may or may not be lying to Jim in this episode, but given the fact that that Jim has been established to be his favorite student, and very clearly does not want Jim to get into a situation where he could get hurt and killed or anything like that. He may or may not be lying. We don't. It's iffy because they have a very. I will admit this. Throughout the trilogy, they have a very complicated relationship. And Jim actually winds up commenting on that in the movie. But they have a very complicated relationship throughout the trilogy, and of course it's unclear as to whether or not Strickler actually cares for Jim or not. But at this point, probably yes, since Jim and Strickler are in fact student and teacher, so maybe. But yeah, this episode, and also we meet an Astro Monstrum, and we find out that Arg was in fact a Gum Gum, which is expanded on later. But it is brought up that that's the reason why Arg is a pacifist. He did some awful things when he was younger, and he's regretted them ever since. So for that reason, he's decided to take an oath of peace and stop being the hulking brute that everybody fears him as. He's just wants to be one of the good guys, and he wants to just take an oath of pacifism and not hurt anybody anymore. So yeah, they do expand on that. They do expand on that later. I will admit that, but it is an interesting point nonetheless, and keep a pin in that because we will be coming back to that much later. But in any case, yeah, this is gonna be interesting, and this does kind of bring the whole narrative thread that Claire is kind of figuring out that Jim might be the Troll Hunter to light, and that is going to be interesting when they finally properly reveal that. But yeah, it is interesting because throughout these first 13 episodes, she kind of has her reservation about Jim and thinks that he might be hiding something. So and now she's finding out what. But it is interesting. It is very interesting. But in any case, that's going to do it for my review of Trollhunters. What you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description as well. It does help support future projects. I do appreciate it if you do that. So just go do that. Go support me over there. I would appreciate that. And also be sure to go and check out my Twitch. I stream Saturdays and Sundays. Please go check that out. I would appreciate it if you did that as well. Just go support me in general. Just do that. And finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent video. It may or may not be this video. Whereas the bottom video is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. Most likely more Trollhunters, but just go check that out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. As next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!